Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you on this glorious afternoon for those of you here on the East Coast and hopefully for a beautiful morning over on the West Coast. We will go ahead and get started now. Just for a few mechanics about our presentation today, we're going to be talking about selecting your team. And creating this program, Caroline and I were talking about the challenges that many of us face as we're stepping into leadership and management roles, and what an opportunity there is to really fulfill some of these voids that we may not be getting in the workplace. On how do you really go about selecting your team and going through the talent cycle to set expectations with them, to properly manage and give them feedback and coaching. And so today what we're going to delve into is selecting your team. And for clarification, we are going to really be hyper-focused on the actual interviewing process itself. And we'll peripherally talk about some basic recruiting strategies, how to stay in touch and connect with people who may be a good fit for your team ongoing. And we'll talk a little bit on the back end about how do you onboard those individuals, but we're really going to be focused on the mechanics of the interview process. How do you assess whether someone is the right fit for your team, and make sure that you understand exactly how to go about that. Next, we will cover, excuse me, I'm trying to get through the slides here. Here you go, our agenda. So we're going to start with the basics of what is interviewing. We're going to assess why it's so important as you talk about optimizing your career and becoming a better manager. And then we're going to talk about the tactics of how do I actually go about setting up an interview process and managing it all the way through to completion. And then we will spend the last 10 to 15 minutes or so going through action planning. So we know that actually setting an actionable objective at the end of a session like this is going to improve the chances that you're able to really get some meaningful experience and take some action walking away from it. So we will go through that process towards the end. It typically takes us about 40 to 45 minutes to get to that action planning session. We are recording this session, so in the event that you have to leave us early, that action planning piece is really big, and it's always great to see what other people are going to take away from it. So if you do need to circle back, this will be up on the gtalumni.org website within a couple of business days. You're welcome to come back and go through that process, or at least see what everyone else is doing. I loved this quote, by the way, on interviewing, and I wanted to share it with you guys about, I don't talk a lot when I interview. My job is to get out of the way, and it absolutely is, and we'll talk about the mechanics of that in section 3. As we get started, we need to talk about what is the process of, what is the interview process? And to define it, you can think of it as a formal meeting in which one or more people question, consult, and evaluate if a candidate is an ideal candidate for the company, the team, and the specific role. So there are a lot of influencers in that. Does the person have the right technical skills, the right soft skills? Is the person who could claim things that you value in your company, in your team? In addition to, can they mechanically perform that particular role? So you can think about it as you have a set of needs that you need met. I'm going to go ahead and, for our purposes, we've been hiring for an administrative support position in our office. So I will use that as our example in this particular session, but you can stretch it into the context of these mechanics, into the context of whatever role you may be hiring for, which is probably going to end up being more technical in nature, giving our audience space. But what you have is a set of needs that you need met. You may need someone to greet clients. You may need someone who can make copies. You may need someone who can set and manage a budget for office supplies and expenses around events, potentially. You may need someone who is going to be able to set or create an inventory management for your office. And so we're going through that specific set of needs. And then what we have to do is actually try and align that with the ideal employee. When we're going to need someone, again, who has some level of technical expertise, so who's comfortable with Excel, who's mathematically oriented. That is not probably going to be someone with 5 years of work experience graduating with their MBA from Georgia Tech. And so you have to make sure that in spite of the fact they may be able to meet those technical needs, are they going to be challenged? How long do you need someone to be in that role? Is it a year, 2 years, 5 years? Are you looking for someone to be there long term? In our administrative support roles, we're always looking for people who are ready to grow and excel, and so we expect them to be in these entry-level roles for about a year before there is an opportunity for them to move into the next role and to grow into that. So we are looking for people who are looking to be challenged, but again, we're trying to balance that with what are the imminent business needs that we have and how are we preparing for the future. So what you wouldn't want to do is try and find someone who is overqualified or underqualified. You're really trying to find that perfect blend. And so what you'll look for is almost a perfect overlap of your needs with that ideal employee's needs. You want to make sure that maybe 90–95% is realistic. You're never going to find someone who's 100% perfect, unfortunately. But where you can overlap that as much as possible, you're going to find that person is able to step into the role. They're able to be successful and get some wins under their belt really quickly. They're able to grow with the role. You'll find other employees are grateful to have someone who can step in and take over those responsibilities. You'll find that that person is able to really thrive and grow. I mean, it's a very symbiotic relationship. And a lot of times we'll make the unfortunate mistake of hiring people based on liking them or recommendation from somebody else without really going through the process of saying, is this the person that we need to hire? And that leads to a number of unfortunate situations. First of all, you could end up wasting a lot of time, effort, and money. Think about it. As you go through the interview process, you've typically got multiple people who are going through the process. A recruiter who's screening candidates. You as the hiring manager are going to have other member of teams of your team that you will engage to participate in that interview. If this person isn't the right fit, you've now wasted all of those individuals' time. They can't get that back. And there's not just the hard cost of their time, but there's the opportunity cost that's lost as well. If you're spending 5 or 10 hours going through an interview process, and one of my past organizations, when we were hiring, we would take a whole day, and that's what we would do. We would have candidates coming in back to back, and we'd pair up and interview them, and they would kind of go through a whole process all day. It was a whole day's time lost if you make the wrong hire. Again, you've got a recruiter's time and other recruiting costs. Some jobs for our administrative support positions will pay as much as $5,000 to the recruiting firm who's doing all the initial selection, but I've heard of people paying $30,000, $50,000, or sometimes it's a percentage of the first year salary of that person's, a percentage like 20% of a person's salary to recruiters and headhunters. So it's really important to realize that that has really valuable costs, and you need to make sure that you're really making the right hiring decision. You're not just hiring someone based on whether or not you like them or you got a good vibe from them. You're really, truly looking at them against the qualities that you need. You can also end up in a situation where that poor person who thinks that they're, getting into the job of their dreams and they're going to be really successful, and they get in and they're underperforming. So then you're having to make an additional investment in training. Their morale is down. And then you've probably got other employees who've been previously doing parts of the role who obviously needed assistance and help from this new team member, and they're still having to continue to do that work while trying to meet the expectations for their current role. And it's this, unfortunately, a very unfortunate downward spiral where everyone's morale is really being impacted by that. Worst case, you end up having to let that employee go. And I don't know if you all have ever seen, there's this graph that says that it takes about 6 months for a person to be 100% productive. And so that in their first month, you're paying 100% you're making 100% of the investment in them. Their salary is going into them, but they're not yet productive for your organization. So it's very forward-looking from the perspective of paying for someone's salary. And so you think about it over the course of time, if you fire that person within 2 or 3 months because they're completely incompetent, because you hired them because you like them and not because they could do the job, you've now wasted all of that money that you've just paid on their salary. Additionally, you have certainly, people were all excited that they had a new resource coming in and was going to be able to offload some of this work, a new member of the team. They were all excited, and then suddenly they're having to pick up all the work. They're trying to form a new relationship with someone. They probably spent time training and assisting in the training process with that person to get them on board, and then now they've left. Then they wonder from a management perspective of, do you even know who you're hiring? Why should I be excited next time? Will it work out with the next one? And that creates a really low morale environment that can be tough for people to work through. And then you have to go back through the process of trying to find someone to actually fill that void that you had to begin with. So it's really important that we take the time and understand exactly what it is that we're looking for in the hiring process in order to avoid all of that angst, turnover and morale issues. In addition to poor performance, your team being unable to meet the expectations that have been set for them. So to become an effective interview, what we first need to do is we need to understand what are the things that we should be doing versus we shouldn't at a really macro level. First, you need to know as a hiring manager, what do you need? We were hiring for a receptionist position a few months ago, and we had some come in who, she reminded me very much of a Georgia Tech graduate. She was polished, she was poised, she was thoughtful, she was highly analytical, clearly a very competent person. She was not very outgoing, unfortunately, and that was not going to do well in a reception role. You wanted someone who was, I always say you want someone who's going to be comfortable talking to the wall, you know, who's bubbly and receptive and can make conversation with just about anybody. And so you need to know that going into it, you know, and what are the trade-offs that you're willing to make in that process. If you need someone who is bubbly and knows Excel, are you willing to settle for someone who has an adequate level of Excel and an adequate personality, or are you going to try and find somebody who has both, which may be more difficult to find, and you'll know going into that process that it's going to take you a little bit longer to find that candidate. You also want to make sure that you're making candidates feel comfortable. Every recruiter who was really, really good that I've ever met does a great job of this, of making sure that they're really bringing out the best in people. It's not about tricking them or you know, asking them a million questions. You want people to feel comfortable. That's who you're going to be working with all day long, and you want that to be very natural. If someone is, you know, knows they're being tested for some period of time, they can answer the way they're expected to answer. What you want them to do is let down their guard and be really authentic, and that's both positive and negative. And I always say I am not the best interviewee. When I'm being interviewed, I get test anxiety, and I am not at my best. And I have found that every job I've ever gotten has been through some type of informal introduction through my network. And that's because in spite of the fact it's an interview, it doesn't have those formal mechanics, and I can just be me, for better and worse. And you want to make sure that you're really enabling those candidates to be themselves. And you'll get so much more from that. We had somebody that we interviewed who was, I mean, very forthcoming, but she kept saying, the recruiter told me to do this, and the recruiter told me to do that. And what I realized is, through that interview process and her being so comfortable, was that she would end up effectively, you know, contacting clients and saying, Adrienne said to do this, or Adrienne said to do that, and I really needed her to be able to take ownership. And so I was able to get visibility into that because she was comfortable talking about the recruiter, and she was comfortable talking about what had transpired. So you did want to have that visibility, and sometimes it's going to lead you to make that hire, and other times it's going to keep you from making that hire. You also want to make sure that you know exactly what it is that your expectations are as it relates to what you need, and that you're evaluating your candidates against that criteria. I had a colleague of mine once, we were coming out of an interview, and I had our interview evaluation form, and I said, how would you rate this person on this, that, or the other? And he said, you know, I want to wait until we've met everybody so that I can see how they all ranked against each other. And the reason that you don't want to fall into that trap, which is very easy to do, is because what that leads you to believe is that the pool of candidates that you have are the right pool. And so then you're going to take the best of what you've got when maybe you may not even have the right person in your midst. And there is, you know, an element of that that's good to see what's really out there. But you want to make sure that you're not settling for a candidate that isn't your right fit in order to fill a seat. And there's certainly an element of time and other factors that you have to consider in order to make sure that you make the most of that. You also want to make sure that you spend adequate time with candidates. I read this article, I believe it was on Bloomberg or Forbes about a year ago, and they were talking about narcissism and how to spot that in the interview. And they said the single biggest factor that you could use to identify some of those characteristics of people who are more difficult to work with, but maybe very, very charismatic in the interview process. They say the right things, they do the right things, to spend more time with them. Because those individuals who struggle with those types of elements, which and they identified in the article, I want to say it was like 1 in 100 people. So not an insignificant number in the grand scheme of things may struggle with some of those attributes. And but that they couldn't really hide it over an extended period of time, and so that you should have, especially for any big hires, you wanted to spend at least 4 to 8 hours in a single day with that person, because they would get tired, they would let down their guard, they would be more authentic. And so, during the interview process, I always like to meet with people on multiple occasions. Again, that gets them more comfortable so you can really see who they are, but it also just allows you to get to know them better, to dig deeper as you come out of an interview, to ask follow-up questions you may not have thought of before. And so that can be really helpful. The things you don't want to do, and certainly neither of these lists are fully comprehensive, but you want to make sure that you're not assessing the competency based on how much you like somebody. And that's such a tough trap to fall into, because I actually had a colleague of mine at one point who was interviewing, and he said, oh, I really struggle. I always want to hire the underdog because I want to give them a chance. And I do remember the one time he went out on a limb and he actually hired the underdog in spite of everyone else's recommendations. We ended up letting that person go within 3 weeks. And so it was obviously exactly one of those examples of a poor use of time and company resources. That being said, he had the opportunity, and at least we knew that we had tried to give the underdog the chance, but it didn't work out. And so, make sure that it's not just about liking that person or feeling bad for them. It can be really, really tough, and you have to try and stay as objective as possible in the interviewing process. And that's where I feel like if you really can assess what it is that you need and measure against it, you can make it very objective for yourself. And again, you want to make sure you're not assessing all candidates against each other, because you may not even have the right person that you're interviewing. Lastly, whenever possible, you want to try and get yourself out of the mindset of you have to fill a seat as quickly as possible. There will be pain that comes with the interviewing process, and that's why you want to make sure you're doing it right, because you don't want to have to do it again, or worse, feel like you're stuck with someone who isn't the right fit. We're always, forced to have these constraints, but I've always tried to make sure that, we're very clearly articulating the process to those other individuals who are also having to pick up the extra work and make sure that the business continues to move forward. So they understand timelines and everything, but they understand, first and foremost, we're not willing to compromise on the quality of people that we have on our team, the quality of the product that we deliver, and so we will take our time to find the right person. And it can be so tempting, to find somebody you like and hire them because it's easy. But the reality is it won't be easy later. So it's a very short-term trade-off. So make sure that you're kind of getting in your mind a certain time frame that you're going to spend 2 to 6 weeks interviewing. If it's a higher level job, you may spend more time than that. And just know that that's how long it's going to take, and set those expectations with yourself and with your team accordingly. So the interview process itself, you want to make sure that you're really prepared. So again, that's going to be going back through those skills and competencies that you need. So those are going to be technical skills. Is someone able to use Excel? And what level of Excel skills are those that you're defining? So, if it's a beginner level, everyone always tells me, oh, yes, I know Excel. They'll have it on their resumes. And what that means is they've opened Excel at some point, and they can do, like, basic sums. And you can ask people, have you ever used a VLOOKUP? Do you know what a pivot table is? And you can tell immediately by whether or not they look confused or they say, yes, I did that for this or that project. And so you can go through that assessment. Now, just because they say, yes, they've done it before, doesn't mean they're proficient at it. So one of the things when we're going through the process for Excel skills is we will actually give people a little test. And so we put together an example, and it's usually not 100% about the mechanics. I mean, it depends on the role of how good they are with Excel as an example, but how willing they are to ask questions, how intuitive using the systems are, whether they seem uncomfortable. There was one person who cried once. I would advise against that. And you certainly don't want, again, you want to make people feel comfortable so that they don't feel stressed out by it. But that's really telling, and you put someone in that situation and they start crying because they're so overwhelmed. Maybe they're not the right person for your particular job. So it gives you great visibility into that. But in terms of being prepared, not only do I put all that matrix together, I have it on a sheet and I have printed copies on my desk, because sometimes the recruiter will call and say somebody's going to be there tomorrow. And you know that you have a series of other commitments and you're not going to be able to get to it. And so by preparing on the front end, I know that anytime I go into one of those meetings, I can be prepared. I can review that person's resume relatively quickly. I'll bring a copy of it with me to the interview. And I'll have my set list of questions around what is it I'm trying to measure and understand when I meet with this person, in order to make the best use of their time and to make sure that I don't fall into the trap of just going, oh, I really liked them, which I know is very easy for me to do as a people person. Again, you want to make sure you're comfortable and conversational. If I can tell someone's uncomfortable, I'll tell them, you know, we really like to look at this as a process of understanding where your skills and competencies are versus where our needs are, help you understand our business and determine if there's going to be a good fit between us, you know, at the end of this meeting. And I'll lay the whole process out for them so that they understand that all decisions aren't being made today, and really, again, to just give them that sense of comfort so that they can be their best and who they really are, in the same way that, you know, we're trying to make sure they understand what we have to offer as an employer. And you're going to want to make sure that you're really thorough. So what exactly does that mean? In terms of being thorough, you want to make sure that you're asking really good follow-up questions. So one thing that I was reading, it was called Get Smart. It's a book on interviewing that I really love. It's actually relatively short, an easy read. And as they go into it, they talk about asking these follow-up questions. And they talk about, I mean, a very rigorous process of 8 hours of interviewing that, depending on the job you're interviewing for, is not going to be appropriate. But because they're hiring like executive level employees, but they talk about asking follow-up questions. And they went through this example, and it was a real example with a guy based on a transcript that they had, where the guy says he and his previous boss didn't get along, so he left his job. And the interviewer asks why. And he says, we had a disagreement over some piece of business. And the interviewer says, oh, well, what was that piece of business? And it was something, the guy, I mean, as they keep asking questions, he more or less intimates that he told his boss that his boss was an idiot, and then he hit him. And the whole thing was, you know, flabbergasting and not something you would ever expect to happen. And you would go, yeah, poor emotional control, bad judgment, clearly not very authentic because he didn't just come out with all this. But if you hadn't asked those follow-up questions, you would have never gotten to that. You said, oh, well, they didn't get along. And so continuing to dig deeper, and that can be really tough because we have a tendency to assume there's not more of a story or somebody would have shared it with us. But a lot of times in the interview, people are giving some people will give short answers on purpose in order to avoid having to dig deeper. So being really thoughtful about that and making sure that you've asked, you know, follow-up questions to really get to the heart of the matter is important. I really like to have multiple meetings with people. Again, I find that increases their comfort level. I do like to take people out to lunch with other members of our team to see how they interact in a group setting, how they're going to engage with our team with multiple people present. And I think, you know, it's just another opportunity where people have a tendency to be more comfortable. We had somebody who made it all the way through the interview process, and then we were prepared to make her hire, so we took her out to lunch with the team so that everyone can meet her and offer feedback. And at lunch, she more or less intimated for the first time that if things didn't work out with this job, then she would go find something else. She wasn't taking that interviewing process as seriously as we were. We were looking for somebody to join us, you know, for the long haul to grow with the organization. And for her, it was a stopgap. She needed a job, she was going to take it, and then she was going to figure out what she was looking for. And it just wasn't the right fit for us because, again, we're making an investment in people. We want to make sure that they're going to be around and that they are excited about what we do, how we do it, the team that we do it with, our product, and they're really going to be bought in and engaged in that environment. So it's really important, I think, you know, to spend quality time with those individuals, and you will just continue to get to know them. And again, that can be, as you go through the process, that can really do wonders for, you know, that candidate as your ideal candidate, or it can make you realize that they're not your ideal candidate. Either way, it's certainly what's best for you as the interviewer. It's what's best for your team, so it's best for the organization as a whole. Again, I mentioned I really like to have other people present. Other people ask questions in different ways. It's a variation of personalities to see how individuals will engage with other people. It makes sure that they're going to have respect for the person who isn't making the ultimate decision. And it's always surprising to me when people somehow have less respect for the person who isn't the hiring manager, but it's really telling about who they are and the kind of person they're going to be in the organization. They're going to be the person who only does what the boss asks and not what their colleagues need and what the organization needs. So having those other individuals present, even if they're informal interviewers, can be really, really powerful. As you come out of that interview process, you want to make sure through each stage of the process that you're taking that employee and you're evaluating them back against the criteria that you defined. Again, that could be their Excel skills. So you would make sure that you're properly assessing that, and then you're documenting it. Because it's going to be very easy when you walk away and you've interviewed 5 people over the course of 2 weeks to forget who you rated on what, and to have those notes and to fall back on. And it can be very easy, again, to fall into the, ooh, this was my favorite candidate because I liked them the most trap. And so you'll want to make sure that you're documenting that. So I actually have the rubric that has excellent, very good, good, average, poor against all of the job descriptions. So with this person, can this person use Excel, and at what proficiency? Is this person an effective verbal communicator? Does this person have good written communication? And you should know that because they should send you an email after the interview in order to follow up. Is this person proactive? And I measure that because I say, if this person did send me a follow-up interview, or excuse me, a follow-up email after the interview, did they just say, thanks, I look forward to next steps? Or did they say, hey, based on our discussion, you reference a set or the other. So here's a project that I worked on in the past, or here's an article that I referenced, or I had somebody, and I was really impressed with this, who actually said in the body of her message, please feel free to call me at this number or email me back at this email. And it was very forward-thinking and proactive. And so notice those subtleties in the way that you're engaging with that candidate. And again, you want to make sure you're evaluating against that criteria as soon as the person leaves, that your brain doesn't have time to move on to other things and forget the specific value that that candidate could bring to your organization and to your team, and to keep a record of that. Additionally, from a liability standpoint, as it relates to all of the requirements we have in the workforce to make sure that we're not discriminating against other individuals, having that as, in your back pocket from an HR standpoint is really powerful too, to be able to say, oh, we eliminated this candidate for these reasons and not for any illegal reasons. So we always make sure to keep all of that documentation on file, and it's not fancy. We just scan the form, stick it in a folder for people that we interviewed for a particular position to make sure that we have it if we ever needed to get back to it. It's not very common, and I've actually never seen it in my career, but it's good HR practice. So for those of you who are interviewing, do make sure that you're evaluating those candidates properly and then keeping a record of it. As you start to find the right candidate, so you've gone through this process now of assessing their basic skills and are they a good fit. You've moved to the next process, of putting them through any technical tests or assessments that you may need to. You've made sure that if your other members of your team really like them, I think they would be a great cultural fit. You want to make sure that if you're taking a person through this process, that they know that you're interested. Particularly, we find on these calls that a lot of us are more reserved, less people, more task people. And so it's really important that we actually state to the candidate that we really like, we're really interested in you and think you would be a great fit for this organization. Obviously, we have a process that we need to go through, but I want to make sure that you know that I would like to stay in a loop on your job search and make sure that before you make any decisions that we have a chance to talk. If not, you could lose a really great candidate who doesn't realize that you're really also excited about them and interested in them to another firm who is communicating that they accept a job and then they follow up with you later and let you know. You don't want to be in that situation if it's someone that you really, really like and think could be a great fit. So just make sure you're communicating that. That being said, it can certainly be a difficult conversation at the end if you decide they're not the right person. But I think you can handle that very objectively by saying, We really enjoyed meeting you. We don't think you're the right for this job because you don't have the right level of Excel skills, or your Excel skills are flawless, but because you are a little bit more reserved, we don't think you'd be as effective in, this reception or client-facing role. And so we would definitely like to keep your information on file because we liked you for all these reasons. There was some reason you were attracted to them to even have that conversation to begin with. And so you want to make sure that you're acknowledging that and saying, in the future, as opportunities open up that are the right fit for you, we will let you know. And in my current job, let's see, it was 14 months from the time that I initially met with the team to the time that they had the job that was the right fit for me. And so it's really important that, as a candidate, you're receptive to that. And as an employer, you're really effectively communicating, we're really interested in you. And, as soon as something opens up that's the right fit for you, we'll make sure to let you know. And you stay engaged with that person. Again, in my particular situation, it was 14 months, and my boss and I would go out, my now boss, we would go out to lunch, and we would catch up on how the business was going, what her problem areas were, where long-term I might be able to be a good fit. And so when the opportunity finally presented itself, it was a much faster conversation. In order to determine that there was an engagement we both wanted to have. And two, I was undoubtedly more prepared and up to speed as a function of having understood what was going on at a very high level over the course of the last year and where the pain points were for her that she was going to need solved. So you are going to want to make sure that you don't lose track of the right person. And again, we're really focused on interviewing today and less on the recruiting, but while you're going through the process and you're meeting really good people, you should absolutely be building relationships with them so that you can tap into them in the future if the opportunity presents itself. So my favorite part, we're about 35 minutes in now, is to go through the process of determining what's one action item that you can take to begin improving your ability to select the best team for you and your organization. So for those of you who may have minimized your chat window, up in the top right-hand panel, there's a downward-facing arrow that you can click on, and that will expand your navigation panel, and then there's a section that says chat. And if that's also collapsed, you can click on the little arrow and expand it, and you can send a message either to all of us or just to Caroline, and I will read those out to the group anonymously, but then we can all take an opportunity to share what's the one thing that you want to do to continue to improve in selecting the right team for your organization. And I will tell you all, every time I go back to the office after these sessions, I come back and I say, wow, there are things that this has been really grounding, and there are things that we could be doing better. And one of those for us is going to be making sure that we're properly defining the job requirements and evaluating against those, and that we're not feeling rushed, because I know that we always are. At the point in time you're really ready to hire, you're usually way past the point when you probably should have started looking, but there are always budget concerns and trying to be thoughtful about time, effort, and resources. And so taking the opportunity to go back and really make sure that we're assessing for the right skills, and even beyond today's needs, but into, what do the next 9 to 12 months look like. We hired a member for our administrative support team probably 4 months ago, expecting we were going to be able to move her out of her role, and the business just hasn't been there in order to justify that move. And we talked to them, we'd set expectations it would probably take a year, and I doubt it will actually end up taking that long. But I'm sure that every day it's tough, because I'm like, I knew she was overqualified when we hired her for the job that she has now. And she knew it too, again, in the opportunity of growth with the right company and the right team. I'm sure it'll all work out, but really being honest with yourself about and realistic around what you think you can achieve is important. We've got several people who have chimed in, so let me make sure to share those with everyone. Someone says, I'm going to make a clear list of criteria when hiring. Absolutely. If you all are interested in resources, if you search for interviewing competencies on Google, you'll probably be able to find some great resources that'll go through like an actual list of what are the different competencies that you should be assessing. And I mentioned the book Get Smart, which is really good. It's kind of an abridged version of Smart Interviewing. And that one, I have the whole resource. It's something like 500 pages It's great. I've never actually read the whole thing. It's almost prohibits itself from being read. It's so large. But for those who are interested, it does have great resource guide with all the competencies and everything and how you might go about measuring those. So as you're building out that list, those types of resources can be really helpful. So you're not having to come up with it. But even as you just kind of think about, oh, this person would need to be able to I would love to be able to, offload this particular piece of work, or we're having this problem, there's this gap, what are those things? What would those things look like? Someone else says, I will make a point to dig more deeply into potential candidates by asking more follow-up questions and making fewer assumptions about their past. That's something else that I always want to be better at, largely because I have a tendency to take things at face value. And so when someone says, yeah, my boss and I didn't get along, I might ask one follow-up question, but I may feel like I was intruding. But in the interview process, you want to make sure that you know who it is that you're interviewing. And so asking those questions, even for people who've legitimately been in situations that were tough, they should have figured out how to handle those and communicate those professionally. If they haven't, that can be a very telling sign. Someone else says, I need to be patient and wait for the right person that fits our culture. Absolutely, it can be so easy. So easy to think, oh, we're just going to hire somebody and we'll be done with this. But a bad cultural hire, even if they have the right technical skills, can have a tremendous impact on your team, morale, and ultimately that person's ability to contribute to the team and the organization. Someone else says they want to better define the qualities that they want as opposed to the questions we want to ask and assume we know a good answer when we hear it. Absolutely. And all those behavioral interviewing techniques and everything can be really helpful. But I find if you can find an opportunity for, in some way, to actually simulate what it is you're trying to assess, that's so much more powerful than just answering questions. In those team interviews, especially in those client-facing roles, it's really a great sense of how someone is going to engage with people they've just met, how they're going to sell themselves, how they're going to articulate their knowledge, understanding of your business, how interested they're going to be in it when they have more people that they can ask about it. So it can be very, very powerful to make sure that you're really thinking about what it is you want to achieve and not how you're going to go about doing it. Someone else asked, how is group recruiting versus one candidate, one or more recruiters? And I'm afraid that if you wouldn't mind providing a little bit more clarification, I'm not 100% sure what you're asking, so I will go on to the next one. But if you'll, Arkadeep, if you'll provide a little bit more context, then I will certainly love to answer that question. Someone else says, I will caution my team against hiring based on a candidate we like versus someone whose needs match our requirements. And that's really true. You want to find both. You want to like them because they're a good cultural fit, but you want to make sure that they have the requirements that you need, and you've properly vetted that. So you don't want to forego liking them, but you need both. Someone else says, I was just promoted to my first management position, and while we are not currently hiring for my team, this webinar has been extremely helpful. Having a well-defined list of hiring criteria and strictly evaluating candidates based upon those will definitely be a part of my process in the future. I'll be more cognizant of falling into the trap of hiring someone primarily because you like the person. Thanks for presenting this webinar. Thank you, Steve. It's absolutely been a pleasure. And yeah, those first few interviews, again, the more prepared you can be for what it is you're looking for, and the more you can just be you, I think that the more effective that you'll be in interviewing and really getting to know someone and assessing their fit. I always say, the first person you meet probably isn't going to be the right fit. Every now and again they are. But so you kind of can go into it knowing that it's just going to take time and that you want to make sure you're meeting as many people as you possibly can and the time frame that you've defined for that interviewing process. Someone says, so this is Arkadeep, follow-up question. For example, having a number of candidates doing a group discussion with a number of recruiters. I have actually never participated in an interview of that sort. So you're saying you have multiple candidates in a room almost doing a round table discussion with a series of different recruiters. Depending upon the role, I think that could be very effective. I'm trying to think if you're someone who's going to be working in a group situation a lot, you're going to want to make sure that they have presence, that their voice can be heard above everyone else's. Someone says, it's horrible, I have interviewed that way before. Someone else says, GT, lead and engage, that's a type of recruiting for mentors for undergraduate students. I think it's definitely interesting. I probably wouldn't want to base my entire interviewing process on it. I, like Angela, agree. I wouldn't thrive in that type of situation. I think the person who's going to probably be the most heard is just the person who's the most dominant in the room. I don't know if that's the most effective way. But if you're looking for someone who's really dominant, that would be an easy way to see it. I think I've told this story in our professional goals seminars, but I had a colleague once who relatively soft-spoken, and our team was a very dominant group. And she was sitting right next to me in this meeting, and she must have said something, which even I was sitting next to her and had the utmost respect for her, never noticed. And we walked out, and she's like, nobody ever listens to me. You know, I suggested this, that, or the other, and nobody even paid any attention. And I was like, you said something? I'd never heard her. She was very soft-spoken and not highly assertive. And so even if she said something, she would always, well, I think, and you would totally gloss over it. And so making sure that I think that could be very powerful, but for somebody like her would totally get overlooked in a group interview, even though she's really highly effective, just not always in the meeting setting, but her job didn't usually require that. So I would make sure that, you know, it was an appropriate format and that you were measuring what you intended to measure. But I think if you're looking for somebody who's going to be really vocal in a group, that would be a great way to do it. And even just can people be comfortable in that situation? Because you wouldn't want to hire the person who didn't talk at all. And you want to hire, the person who probably could hold their own. Someone else says, how do you recommend going about preparing other people, individual contributors on your team to participate in the interview process? This is the most uncomfortable thing, and we always go round and round about it in my office, but absolutely you want to go the mock interview process. And it's uncomfortable, and it makes everybody uncomfortable, and it feels so cheesy, but the reality is that practice is what's going to get you there. And coming up with these, and I've participated in them before, particularly related to interviewing, and we would come up with these crazy situations where, like, the guy punched the old boss in the face, and you had to get to that by asking enough questions. And you would put people in that situation so that they practiced the follow-up questions, and that they almost started to expect that there was going to be, some big hidden item that they had to find. And by doing that, you really ensure that they were asking the follow-up questions. And there is no, right or wrong. It's just you're trying to ask enough questions that you're really digging several layers past what is being actually said to you. But I absolutely think that, from a quick and simple way, the best way to do it is to do some mock interviews. You could certainly hire someone to come in and do training. I've participated in those as an employee and a hiring manager, and they can be really effective. You just, again, you want to make sure that there is that interactive process. We could spend all day telling you all the things you should and shouldn't do and how to go about it, but I mean, it's going to be the process. And so if you have people on your teams, I would lead them through the process, right, of what is it that we're trying to evaluate? And you go through and you make the list, and then you come up with your matrix of how does this person rate on it, and how are we going to evaluate it as a group and a team? And I think that can be really powerful. Someone else says, what are some, oops, we got a lot of questions, so it's hard to read them as new ones are coming in. Someone else says, what are some good questions to understand if a candidate can be a good team member? I think you can ask them, and I always, GT alumni, we're never new to this, but, are you the person in the team who tends to take the lead? Or, and, when there are group projects, you end up shouldering the burden of it, or, making sure everything gets done? Or how have you typically performed in those roles? People know what they should do. They're not typically going to lie to you about what they have actually done. So that can be really highly effective. But I think, the more you can engage with them one-on-one, ask about their past experiences, give them some mock situations. But I think seeing how people engage, they are who they are. And once you get them comfortable, you can really get a sense of that. And that's why I love the lunches. I've been out to lunch before with people who didn't give the other individuals who were coming to lunch with us the right time or attention or even seem interested in them. Those are not going to be good team members. You know, they're probably either through their own lack of comfort or not feeling like they're important because they're not the hiring manager. You can really get a sense of that just, you know, even through those lunches. Someone else says, do you have any thoughts or key actions for when you're interviewing internal candidates versus external? Or should you handle them pretty much the same? I think, you know, internal candidates always have more of a sense of the actual role in the culture. Certainly depending on how large your organization is and how big a change it would be to move between teams, there's going to be a cultural element. For instance, at BIP, our wealth advisors really is a function of their roles. They're out of the office a lot. They make their own schedules versus our operations team is in the office, you know, standard working hours. So the culture can feel very different. And it's not markedly, but it's enough that, you know, if somebody were making the leap from one to the other, I'd make sure that they were going to be able to culturally adapt to that, not take for granted that our culture was the same throughout the organization. Otherwise, I would also, I mean, the challenge with interviewing internal candidates is they're still there if they get a no. They can feel like they were passed over for someone else or not given an opportunity after all their service. I think you have to be really careful about making sure to keep them engaged and telling them that, you know, you're really excited about whether or not this could be a good opportunity for them, for their growth, but to make sure they understand that there is a set of skills and requirements that need to be met in order to fulfill that job. And we had this happen a couple of times at one of my previous companies where people would interview for another position and then they wouldn't get the opportunity and they would come back, they would do nothing differently and then come back and interview the next time a comparable role would come open. And they're no better prepared than they were 6 months or a year ago. And so what we started doing was after, with any internal candidate who was interviewing for a job, sitting down with them against the actual interview criteria and explaining to them where they succeeded and where they needed to true up some of their skills and competencies. Because if it was something they were really, truly interested in, we wanted to make sure that they had that opportunity, but they understood there was work to be done. If you don't know Excel, it's not our responsibility to give you that skill so that you can get another job, but here are tools and resources available. I mean, there's so many online like lynda.com, and I'm a big fan of Udemy. With, you know, $10, $25 classes that'll take you through the basics of Excel. And that also, in my opinion, as a hiring manager, is demonstrating that you're accountable and you want to grow and you're willing to take ownership and you're going to go do what needs to be done. And that you're really, really genuinely interested in it. And we had somebody else who, she would interview for every job. And as it turned out, she was like, well, I just thought that it would show that I was interested in the company. I don't really want to move. But it was a waste of company time, but she wasn't looking at it from that perspective. So having really honest conversations about it after the fact, I think, is really beneficial. So what you don't want to do is disengage an employee because they feel like they've been passed up for an external candidate. Someone else just asked, what were the two websites you just referenced for Excel help? Lynda, Linda.com. I believe it's lynda.com, but if not, you can search for Lynda in training. It may be YNDA too. Please forgive me. Is it? Yeah, someone else says it is. It's a Y, Lynda. So that one is a great resource. It's a little bit expensive, and I think it's like a subscription-based model. I think it, and they may have changed it since last time I looked at it, where you could pay per course. I also like Udemy, U-D-E-M-Y, like Academy, Udemy, and it's people who put up their own training curriculum. They usually have a preview. I always recommend looking at the preview because sometimes the person isn't an effective communicator, and you can tell that. They'll give you like 5-minute sample, or it may not be a style of presentation that you like. But what I like about them is that they'll do, you know, discounts and sales, and they'll do like a course for $10, but they're all usually reasonably priced, and it's on a course by course basis, and you can always get back to anything that you paid for. And I found those to be really effective and more affordable. And they have quite the diversity of content. They do rankings of, so people who've taken it rank, you can see the number of people who've taken it. So if 5 people took it and they all ranked it great, that was probably somebody's parents or, you know, friends or family, versus if there are 3,000 people who took it who all rated it 5 stars, you know, that it's probably got a lot more validity. It's the kind of course you want to take. So I highly recommend those two. And again, I would do that for anybody, certainly who is internally interviewing, to make sure that if they were genuinely interested in the role and they were not at the right level of competency in certain areas, that I communicated that to them, and then it's their choice to choose to follow up and do something differently. All right, well, if there are no other questions, we hope you all have an absolutely great week, and next month we will be talking about managing your team and how to go about, once you've got them, you've got the right people in place, how do you go about setting expectations for them and walking them through that process. Lori says, go Jackets, absolutely. Got Boston this week, Boston College this week. Is that Thursday? Who is it? Alcorn State this week, sorry. Got my games mixed up. Quite the football fan, as you can all tell. I try to fake it. All right, everybody, thank you all very, very much, and we would absolutely love to see you if you're available next month. And if you have any follow-up questions or need anything else, please feel free to email me or Caroline. Have a good one.